This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Kathryn and I are delighted to have Carlee Tressel Alson back on the show with us. You may have already heard her other two episodes on emotional risk-taking in writing and writing process, in which Carlee gives you 5 amazing tips for staying on track with your drafts. So if you haven't heard those yet, make sure you listen to them. Tonight we are discussing multiple point of view fiction, good thing, bad thing, pros and cons. I have a pretty strong opinion on multiple point of view from my years of being a developmental editor and writing coach, but I'm not going to launch into anything. I'm going to pass the mic. Kathryn, why don't you start us off on this one?
Oh, me, okay.
Yeah, do you write? Yep. I know, I do that to you.
I know, right? Every now and then, it's okay. I do write multiple POVs. I do not write a lot of multiple POVs. I usually stick with about 2 main point of view characters. I occasionally will have some jaunt into maybe a third, but never like a super main point of view. I've never written more than 3. I just feel like it's too unwieldy. I can't keep track of everything that's going on. I feel like I have to invest too much in the characters. And so I feel like 2 is a really good handle for me. And I feel like for kind of the more epic fantasy, like you can still do really big stories with 2 point of view characters and keep your readers happy.
Yes. So, yeah. And you just said a lot with too many point of view characters. It's unwieldy. It's a lot to keep track of. You have to do so much more work. Yeah. All right, well, good night. That just covered it.
That covered our opinions.
That,
so Carlee,
yep.
weigh in.
Yeah. No, Carlee, over to you.
It's interesting because right. And I write in 7 characters. No, I don't. No, but I would say I'm currently at work. I'm in the beginning of a 3 point of view novel that I can pretty much already tell will either end up being 2 or 1. But it's interesting, and I'm chuckling because I think, well, if I already see that 3 is maybe going to be too many for this story, why am I continuing to write these points of view? But truthfully, at this point in the process, I think I need to write all 3 stories, or I need to write all 3 perspectives. And they are weaving together to, move the plot along, to deepen the conflicts. But I think what I'm going to see is that one of the characters is not merely for my own entertainment, but is not adding an essential voice.
Right.
It's actually a mother and a daughter, and then a man. And I'll just say a man. That's very undescriptive. But he figures importantly in the story, but I'm not sure we need to know what's happening in this world from the close third person that I'm currently writing in.
Right.
So I can already tell that that's maybe not going to work, but I'm going to see it through to see how important his perspective figures in.
Yes. Yeah. And what you just said, I think, is so important. I have nothing against multiple POV stories, and I do write them, in fact, they're all multiple POV, actually. but it has to be done well, and it has to be done in a way that is organic and essential to the story. So I love what you were just saying, Carlee, about how using these 3 points of view is getting you into the story and taking you on this journey of discovery, but that you as a writer are willing to pull one of those points of view out before the end of this process, because you're already sensing that it's not going to be critical to the story.
Yes. And I think on a total like practical, technical level, what I'm finding is that this possibly extraneous third point of view, this man, he's in almost every scene with the other 2 point of view characters. So I'm not sure even his presence needs to be we need to be so close to his consciousness, right? We don't necessarily need to be in his head, but certainly so far we don't need to be in, following his point of view, because we wouldn't see that part without him. He's in the scene already. This is a shorter way to put it. So I think that's maybe a good place to start if one is wondering whether, a certain point of view character is even necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of younger writers, I find, when they're writing multiple POVs, A, they'll have too many POVs, and B, they won't necessarily assign the scene to the best POV character for that scene. So for whatever reason, they're telling it through the lens of Joe, when really Sam has the most at stake in that scene. Sam's the one we're going to care about and be emotionally invested with, given the action of the scene. So we need it to be through Sam's lens.
Right.
We need to get in that head, that perspective, that body, and that emotional set in order to really live this scene as a reader.
Right. Right. I have an example of what not to do.
Okay,
and I'm
great.
going to give it with the caveat that I have read multiple books from this author, and this is the only book that I have seen with this mistake. So the author is Naomi Novik, and the book is called Spinning Silver. And the two main female protagonists are in an epic battle against the antagonist in this scene. And who are we watching it from? The younger brother's eyes. It drove me crazy the entire time. So it was okay for me to have his point of view in other places in the book where the other two protagonists were not in the room, like we're talking about. But the second there was that conflict, escalation, the two girls had very necessary parts to play, and one of them had the most at stake, like literal death on the line, right? That's who I cared about. That's who I wanted to see the scene from. And instead I was watching it from this brother whose commentary was like, oh no, my sister. And I'm like, I don't care. I really don't. So taking that scene and looking at it from that perspective, like you're talking about, Alida, who matters? Who do I really care about in this room? What's at stake, and who is the reader going to look at and say, that's who I care about? Like, that's who you want to be seeing the scene from their point of view. And I like that what you're saying, Carlee, is like, he's already in the scene. Maybe my readers are going to care more about what the mother has to say or what the daughter has to say rather than what he has to say. So yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it, like you're saying.
Well, and I like what you just said too about the distinction between who do we care about and what the stakes are versus it would just be interesting, because I think that's where that's an easy trap. Is it'd be really interesting. I don't know I have not read the book you're talking about. I've not read other work by the author, but I was thinking, well, what would be the motivation of the author to do that? Don't know in this case, but thinking about myself, why am I even trying this experiment with this third narrator or the third point of view? And I think, well, it's really interesting. I feel like he would give a really interesting take on it through his lens, but interesting, and the reader cares about this person. There's most at stake. Yeah. Those are two different things completely, but easily mistaken for each other, I think.
Yeah.
Right. Especially as the writer, because we are so much more invested in each of our characters and each movement on the page than we can reasonably expect our reader to be. So when you're judging your own work, you have to keep asking, who cares? And the answer must be the reader, not me, not the character, not my best friend, right? But the reader has to be invested in this. And we've all heard of readers who will skip chapters where they don't like that point of view.
Confession time, that's me.
And you don't want that as a writer. You need every point of view character to earn the crown. Being the point of view character places a burden on the writer and the character in terms of character development, voice, stakes. There's a lot that goes into making that character compelling.
Yeah, well, each point of view character almost needs their own story. They're in the larger story, but they need their own story. And so if your work, the larger story that you're trying to tell can't support that many essentially main plot lines, character arcs, all of it, then you need to ditch them. Like, you just make that character a supporting character. Maybe you come back to them in another book where they're a main character or something. You know, you can work around that. Like, you don't have to just say, oh, this character's gone forever, woe is me, I can't write this book now, like we all dramatically like to do when our favorite darlings are cut out of our book. But just to realize that is, you know, the one story that you're trying to tell. Don't try to tell too many in one book.
I think it seems to me that I have seen more successful dual point of view stories than multiple. Like, if we say dual is 2, multiple is 3 or more. And in part because I think a dual point of view lends itself to, there's one main plot line and 2 actors in it are experiencing it completely differently. And yet their lives intersect in some essential way. The novel that comes to mind that I think does it really well is Sue Monk Kidd's The Invention of Wings. That is told from the perspective of a young woman who is part of the family of plantation slave owning people, and then one of the slaves in the house is the other point of view character, where they're in this shared setting. They're in the same story. The plot line, it's not 2 storylines, it's one, but they're having such different experiences, and the pressures on that situation, personally, historically, huge, really big, important human themes, you know, are pressing on these 2 characters and making it such that their overlap is essential. It's not coincidental, it's not convenient, it's essential. I do recommend it. Very good novel.
Yeah, I like that. Definitely the dual point of views thing, I feel like, is just a really essential way of telling stories. Like, there's so many books that have 2 point of views, and you really do need both. So dual versus multiple, I think there's definitely a different conversation to be had on each end.
Right. Another really wonderful book with multiple POV is The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver, which I'm aware I refer to it fairly often. It's one of my all-time favorite books, but it is a brilliant example of multiple POV. There are 5, the 4 sisters and the mother only appears occasionally, so it's primarily the 4 sisters we're concerned with, and so they are having the same set of experiences in terms of the plot arc, because they're still children in their parents' home, but they are having extremely different experiences in terms of their character arc. And another thing that's brilliant about this book is they all have distinct voices. They're telling their stories in the first person. And so the narrative shifts with the point of view character. And being siblings, they've got the same socio-political, cultural, religious upbringing as each other. You know, they share their parents and all those experiences, and yet they have distinct individual voices, which is such an accomplishment for any writer. I'm just like, oh, Barbara Kingsolver.
Right.
You know, hail to thee.
Absolutely. Have either of you read The Art of Fielding by Chad Harbach?
No.
What drew me to the book in the first place, I tend to gravitate, Alida knows this and we chuckle over it, into sports narratives. And I really enjoy, I enjoy lots of sports narratives. And this particular one, baseball, a college baseball team and college baseball players figure as the main characters. It's multiple point of view. And I think there are maybe four point of view characters. And it's very interesting because I've had a conversation. I think they're handled very well. It makes for a very rich story, very fleshed out. I've had a couple of people who read it, though, who were maybe less enthusiastic about it, comment that they felt like they couldn't get close to any one character. And I feel like that's perhaps one of the pitfalls, even though I felt very pulled along and very absorbed by the world in the book. that this person felt like no one really, no one character pulled the reader into the story like they hoped.
Right. Yeah, that is a common pitfall with multiple POV stories, when the writer moves too quickly between them, and so you don't have a chance to really invest in each character or in that character's experience in the movement that that character is going through, chapter by chapter. Was there something about the art of fielding that allowed you to feel drawn into it?
Yeah, and I think what really worked for me with the point of view characters, like why these particular characters were chosen, and I think also why they lend themselves to a sports story, is that you have a team with several people on it, right? A baseball team is going to have not as many as, say, like a large football team or cricket team or something like that, but like a baseball team is going to have a core group of players. A few of them, you can't make them all point of view characters, right? That would be a major misstep. Right. But when you're in a team dynamic like that, having the point of view from a few different people enriches that part of the narrative. I think that really worked. And also we had characters. It wasn't just the people on the team. It was also it was a couple of the players, and then the president of the college, who, was a man in his, let's say, so you have these 20-something-year-old college baseball players. You have a man in his, let's say, 60s, and then his daughter, who is sort of she's a very important character, but she's kind of a bridge. She's the connection between the people on the team and this president of the college, right? She's a peer of the players, and adds a completely different perspective. She's not on the team. She's a woman. Right. So there are another important perspective is represented. So I feel like there was a good balance of who is in this world and why they matter. And I think that's why the multiple worked. Yeah. And like I said, that natural, the way a team setting, a team is almost as much as, that just popped out of my mouth, but a team is as much a setting as it is a group of characters. The team is the backdrop, how the story plays out.
Yeah, I like how you brought up the daughter and the president of the college, and how that expands the lens through which we experience the story, from just the 20-ish-year-old baseball players to give it a much richer context and, perspective.
Yeah, because I feel like the temptation as writers is you have an ensemble cast and you fall in love with so many of those characters that you want to tell, you want to like get in all of their heads, right? And I like what you were saying when you're using this third perspective, right? You're almost like using it for character development. So I think like go for it, write the point of view to develop your character, to know who they are, but just don't leave it in there because like we've already said, you only need one point of view for that particular lens. Like if you're going to expand outside of that ensemble into something else that matters to the storyline, then you have room for another point of view.
Right. Absolutely. And I was thinking another example, I think, and this is maybe not helpful because it's fiction, but it's in the TV realm, which Alida, I feel like this tees up your connection between like learning POV from novels versus film or TV, but I will allow me to go here for a moment. Okay. That one of the ways in which an ensemble cast I think really works is in the TV series Friday Night Lights. Also happens to be sports oriented, right? But I don't think it's as much about team as it is. There are these different, every person related to this football team, which is kind of like the nucleus of the story, has their own hopes, dreams, motivations, humanity, inhumanity, all these things about them that totally transcend this seemingly flattening thing that high school football in Texas, in this fictional town in Texas, is. And I feel like that's something that Friday Night, like I learned a lot. I learned some good fiction principles from seeing how not only the point of views were treated, even though I wouldn't write a novel that way, but also seeing how the stakes were ratcheted up bit by bit, such that you did care about everyone. That was kind of magical in the way it was handled in the writing of that show. But Alida, I say that, and then I say, I'm sure you've seen a lot, or you've mentioned that you've seen a lot in the editing work you've done, that writers are kind of mimicking, they're doing filmic things rather than novelistic things.
Yes. Yeah. And multiple POVs is a major, if not the major mistake I see made. We're so used to television and film where the camera follows every character everywhere, and we're quickly jumping from one scene to another. But what writers forget is that in film, you've got an entire team of creatives making this happen. And as an audience, you've got a lot of sensory input, auditory and visual. And it, that as a writer, you've got to translate all of that material to a page. And then the other risk by trying to do multiple POV off of film instead of from novels is that film does not have a narrator. The camera kind of functions as a narrator by showing us the setting, and, those musical scores can convey some emotion, but it's not the same as narrative or actually going inside the head of a character and experiencing it. So the mistakes I see in manuscripts are that there are too many of those jump cuts, going from scene to scene to scene with different characters and no depth of connection. And then there's also no real sense of narrative on the page. When we need that, we rely on it in order to experience the story because we aren't getting all of the other input that you get through film.
Right. On the subject of the narrator, I read recently a really useful essay by the fiction writer Richard Russo called In Defense of Omniscience.
Yeah.
And that's one of those potential solutions for multiple POV. Not the solution, but a solution to consider. If you have the omniscient narrator, I mean, that's a form that's maybe, or a narrator that's not as popular as it used to be as in, say, like the 19th century, right? In novels, but that you can accomplish a lot with an omniscient narrator, and perhaps the bad rap it's gotten in the last, however, 100 years or whatever, or different narrators have kind of overtaken in popularity, that you can actually accomplish a lot of really good storytelling with omniscience.
Right.
And you're getting the consciousness of these characters like a multiple point of view is without that choppiness. You have that narrator to guide you. And somewhere in the essay, Russo says something about we're storytellers after all, not story showers.
Yes.
And I think like that's a really useful thing to remember when we get a little too wrapped up in the show don't tell piece, right? Like yes, show don't tell or show a lot, but then when you have a narrator who the reader can really trust and who has access to everyone's minds, then you also have that opportunity.
Right. You do.
For the reader to really move along.
Yes. I love Omniscient. The current book project I have that I'm working on is in the Omniscient. I just want to note that it requires much more control and a skilled hand to write in the Omniscient. So,
yes, not for the faint of heart.
No, definitely not. But I think we have said a lot of great things about multiple point of view, both pros and cons, and recommended some really good reading for people interested in multiple POV. And there will be links to everything we referenced in the show notes, as well as links to some of Carlee's writing. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.